Hello, everyone. My name is Clarissa. I'm an English instructor and UK admissions consultant here at Arch. And today we're going to be discussing how to tackle an IO, the individual oral. So let's start with what the IELTS actually is. So the IELTS is an oral exam that forms your internal assessment for the IB English A language and literature syllabus. And it is a task that both SL and HL students have to do. For SL students, it will account for 30% of your overall grade. And for HL students, it will account for 20%, which is still quite a large chunk. So what you'll be doing when you start tackling the IO, right, is that you'll be selecting an extract from one literary text plus another extract from one non-literary text. And these extracts have to address a common global issue. So both of these extracts have to be from bodies of work that you've already studied thus far as part of your IB syllabus. And while you're doing this, while you'll be going in depth into your extracts, an address of a larger body of work is also required. And for your literary work, this would most probably mean that you have to address some scenes in the rest of the novel or play or whatever your literary text is. And for the non-literary text, it would probably mean that you would have to address the text author's other works in their collection, or other things that they've written or painted or created. So you'll be preparing 10 minutes of an oral response in advance. Essentially, you'll be giving a little bit of a monologue and presenting it to your teacher within 10 minutes. And once you finish with those 10 minutes, you'll move on to engaging in a 5-minute Q&A session with your teacher, where they will ask you questions related to what you've touched upon or said in your IO. And they'll be trying to fill in any gaps that they've noticed and trying to give your score that one last little boost. So moving on, let's take a quick peek at the marking criteria. You'll be seeing that there's 4 marking criteria in A, B, C, and D, which will look very similar to what you will have seen for your paper 1, your paper 2, or even your HL essay if you've gotten onto there. But for the IO, when we're looking at A and B, the understanding of your texts and their implications, the difference is that they have to be extremely convincingly connected to your chosen global issue. And this will affect A and B. And for criterion C, you'll have to make sure that your treatment of your texts and your treatment of the bodies of work that those texts will be coming from is well balanced. So that's a little bit of the difference, what we have to be looking at when we're considering the IO marking criteria. So, obviously the first step in tackling your IO would be you have to make 3 overarching choices of the things that I've been talking about. So there's the choice of the global issue, and then obviously there's the choice of your literary work, and then the choice of your non-literary work, right? So the obvious question that it would probably pop up when you're looking at this slide is, which choice do I make first? Am I supposed to choose my GI, my global issue first, or am I supposed to choose my text first? So a little bit of a cop-out, but the answer to this is actually that there's no correct sequencing in your choosing. So the obvious answer is that there's no right answer. If you're drawn to one of the global issues that we will be looking at in a little while, if you're drawn to one of them, if you feel like there's something in this issue that you feel especially like impacts you, or it's something you want to explore, or something that you've run into yourself in daily life, then it's okay to start with the global issue and then seeing what works you want to choose to exemplify or explore the issue that you want to talk about. On the flip side, if you've gone through, if one of the literary works or non-literary works you've gone through in class, you feel like has especially had an impact on you, then you are welcome to choose the texts first, or even the extracts first, before you choose like a partner text. So choose your literary work and then your non-literary work, or your non-literary work and then your literary work. Choose a pair of texts and then see what common theme, what common common global issue they have. And then before you lock in on that global issue and narrowing down your topic within the global issue, so there's no correct sequencing. It depends on what you genuinely want to explore in your oral. So moving on to the global issues that we've been talking about, these are 5 fixed issues that you get to pick from. The first one would be culture, identity, and community. Second one would be beliefs, values, and education. Third one is politics, power, and justice. Fourth is art, creativity, and the imagination. And the last one would be science, technology, and the environment. So you're welcome to choose any one of these 5, but normally people would gravitate towards culture, identity, and community, or politics, power, and justice. So this is just a trend that we've noticed. But again, if you want to be talking about art and creativity or science and technology, that's completely fine. But the example that I will be going through in a little bit will be focused on culture, identity, and community, and politics, power, and justice. So have a think about which global issue interests you. And we'll be moving on to the example now. So the 2 texts that I've chosen to go through is the literary one will be an extract from Lolita by Nabokov, Nabokov. And the non-literary one will be a cartoon, How to Testify as a Woman by Liza Donnelly, a cartoonist. So let's go ahead and look at the extracts before I review what global issues these texts can work with. So this is an extract early on from Lolita. It's a description of some of the actions and the way Lolita is dressed from the perspective of Humbert Humbert, the narrator of the story. So right away, what I would notice about this is there is an extreme focus on the way Lolita's dressed, right? So she wore that day a pretty print dress I had seen on her once before, ample in the skirt, tight in a bodice, short-sleeved pink, checkered with darker pink, etc., etc. She was not shod, however, for church. Her white Sunday purse lay discarded near the phonograph. And then he continues to go on about her skirt, and then he intercepts this apple that she's eating. So right away, you would be noticing this kind of religious imagery, right? So she was holding an Eden red apple. So that's reminiscent of Garden of Eden, kind of like the fall of man, that kind of thing. And then it's followed up with this, she was not dressed for church. Her Sunday purse lay somewhere discarded. So I'm noticing heavy religious imagery. I'm noticing a lot of the male gaze with how this middle-aged divorcee is describing the daughter of the woman that he's planning on remarrying, because of the focus on how she's dressed and all these pink and red colors, and how the narrator is kind of essentially sexualizing this underage girl's pink checkered skirt and the action of something as mundane as eating an apple. That's something I'm picking up on. And also how, in terms of authorial choices, how the author is deliberately using diction to highlight the young age of Lolita Dolores, and to make the scene, to highlight the uncomfortable nature of the scene, because we're seeing here, if we look at the last paragraph, for example, I caught her by her thin, knobby wrist. This is not the wrist of an adult. This is the wrist, it's being highlighted. This is the wrist of a young girl. The pink skirt itself is a symbol of, it evokes like childish innocence, and also in the middle, like right here, the monkeyish nimbleness, that brings up, I think, images of childish like playfulness. So her age is being emphasized. So these are all things that I've noticed in this extract that I could talk about. And let's move on to see how I'm going to connect this to our non-literary text, a cartoon, right? So How to Testify as a Woman by Liza Donnelly. This is a cartoon. It's obviously not as wordy as what we had for Lolita just now, because it's a cartoon. It's a completely different text type. It's non-literary, but there are still common threads that we can draw together, right? So let's take a look at this cartoon. What do I notice right away? There's a gigantic title on top of the cartoon, How to Testify as a Woman, which is the title of the cartoon. Right away, you pick up on the irony of the text, right? Because how to testify, that's almost instructive. It's giving like instruction manual or advice pamphlet. But really, if we're just thinking about like testifying, that's a very legal thing. That's supposed to be a very it's not supposed to be related to your gender, right? So now I'm interested in seeing what advice Donnelly is giving for women to testify. So we're seeing obviously, because it's a cartoon, there is a little figure, a drawn figure of a woman at like a court, and she's surrounded by all of these instructions, right? All of these arrows pointing at her. So let's see how it's presented visually, right? So the dull color of the blazer, the color of her hair, so the posture of the testifying woman. These are all things that we could pick up on in the cartoon, in the drawing, and we could relate that to how the verbal, the written instructions as well. So clearly styled hair, indicating willing participant to perform standards approved by the patriarchy. So there's that direct criticism there. Hair is professional, but also very feminine. It's not threatening, maybe even a tad sexualized in an appropriate manner, right? So it's extremely ironic. It shows how the patriarchy dictates the balance between professionalism and how to like appear professional, but also on a very strict level. But also at the same time, you're expected to be desirable, but also you have to be respected. So there's this kind of like restriction. We can think about how the form of the cartoon contributes to that. And how the words are surrounding the woman who's testifying, right? So we would be thinking about form, we would be thinking about color, and then how the words work together with those colors. And then I would have to link this to Donnelly's larger body of work. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it because it's a popular choice for the non-literary works that is studied in IB A Lang Lit. So I'll be linking it to possibly her published book of cartoons or her editorial comics, which a lot of them will be seeing gender expectations on young children, young girls, and how women are subject to gendered violence, that kind of thing. So how do I link these two extracts together, right? So let's look at the global issue, how we bring the texts to the global issue. So a couple of potential global issues that we could tackle here, which will affect what parts of the extracts you'll focus on like analyzing, right? So what I'm seeing potentially, you could do a culture, identity, and community topic by talking about how gender expectations shape or restrict or affect individual action. So that would be related to identity and community. Or you could go into politics, power, and justice, like another one of the popular topics. You could talk about potentially women's lack of agency within a patriarchal system, or women's lack of control over their bodies. So the difference between whichever global issue you link this to would affect the examples you choose from the extracts, and maybe what you'll be discussing for the larger when you go into talking about the larger body of work. But that's just very quickly an example of how you could look at an extract, find things to talk about, and then link it to a global issue. So moving on to some like general tips for the IO. So I think first thing, because you'll be choosing your own extract, so it's careful to choose manageable extracts. So keep, especially for the literary extract, keeping them at a manageable length. You're allowed to go up to 14 lines, but you have to think about if you'll manage to analyze most of those 40 lines, right? So usually it might be tempting to go up to 40 lines to fulfill that, but then manageable is key. So I'd say around 15 to 25, just so you manage to go through everything you've chosen. And for the non-literary text, it might be one cartoon, or yeah, it might be one panel. So it just depends on how much time you think that would take you. And another thing is balance is also key. We've been talking about how balance is important for criterion C, focus and organization. So think in 1-minute blocks for your introduction and your conclusion, and 2-minute blocks for everything else. What that means is think about it as the 10 minutes as you having 4 minutes each for your literary and non-literary texts, and breaking that down, you'll have 2 minutes each for, the first extract, and then 2 minutes for the body of work, and then 2 minutes for the other extract, and then 2 minutes for the other body of work. Come to 8 minutes, leave some time for introduction and conclusion, and that'll be around 10 minutes. We need to be very careful about the body of work as well, because for whole novels and plays, this would be a whole play. For example, if you had chosen something like Lady Macbeth's monologue as your extract, your whole body would be the play Macbeth, but not Shakespeare's entire collection of work, right? But if you had chosen one short essay or a poem from a series of short essays or a poetry collection, you'll have to reference the other separate texts. You'll also have studied as part of that body in class. So yeah, think about balance. Third thing is flexibility. We were talking about how there's no correct sequencing in choosing your global issue and in your text. This also applies to the structure of your IO. There's no correct structure. You can talk about the literary text first. You can talk about the non-literary text first. You can talk about the extract first, and then the body of work, and then the other extract, and then the body of work. Or you could choose to talk about the body of work first, and then the extract A, and you can talk about your other extract and then the other body of work. So there's no correct sequencing in this as well. It just depends on what works best for the flow of your topic, your entire project, what you're going to be talking about. So 2 other things would be to think of the IO as a separate entity to the rest of your assessments, the rest of your IB English studies, because both the literary and non-literary works will be chosen from works you've gone through in class, right? So you may think of some points of analysis you want to make as obvious. Maybe you've already discussed it in class or something, because and you might decide to then omit them from your presentation. But you have to think about the external examiner who will be moderating your IO. They will only have your 15-minute audio recording in front of them, so they will know what you've discussed in class. So by thinking of it as its own thing, you'll be able to make it more all-rounded and like complete in itself, so as not to leave out any important points. And in the same vein, do not rely on the Q&A section that your teacher will be doing with you, because you're strictly not allowed to rehearse any part of your IO with your teacher, who's your internal examiner. So even if you think you already know your extracts inside out, your teacher might find a way to ask you about them or about their connections to your bigger body of work in a way that you might not have anticipated beforehand. So rather than glossing over some parts of analysis in your 10-minute presentation in hopes of betting that your teacher will ask you about them, it's better to make sure that your 10-minute monologue is a self-standing entity that's complete in its own exploration of the ideas that you'll have chosen, and think of the Q&A as simply like a supplement. So you're not supposed to, rely on it, that kind of thing. So I think that's the end of it. So I hope the examples and also the general tips have been helpful, and good luck on your IO if you're going through it soon. So that's all for today. Thank you.